everybody. This is Dave Von Kleist.
And Joyce Riley.
We all know knowledge is power, and that's why we call this the Power Hour. The opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of the staff, management, sponsors of this radio station, President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bob Bernanke, Hank Paulson, Timothy Geithner, and all the other wonks. Wonks. I don't know. Why not? If the shoe fits, you know. Anyway, welcome to hour number 2 of today's Monday installment of the Power Hour. This is Dave.
And Joyce, and I thank you for joining us in the Power Hour today. Bob Chapman is our guest on Mondays because we respect what he has to say. And he puts out an International Forecaster newsletter. That's the title of it, The International Forecaster. You can go to the website at theinternationalforecaster.com, or you can email him at bob@infoforecaster.com. If you have a desire to want to get a free copy, to check out a free copy of this, you can go to, let's see here, you can call 877-479-8178 or email info@infoforecaster.com. Our guest today is Bob Chapman, and we are loaded with questions for him. Thank you, Bob, for joining us again on the program today.
Well, thank you. Incidentally, that email address, to be corrected, is bob@INTFORECASTER.com.
Oh, I was wrong. Thank you very much for that. INT. Not the first time I've been wrong.
INT as in Tom.
Okay, as an international, INT. Got it. Bob
right.
at INTForecaster.com for any other questions other than subscription. Okay, let's look at what's happening right now. Stocks were down on Friday, but my goodness, over 200 points up on the Dow futures today, and the Hang Seng was up over 600 points. Looks like happy times are here again.
Well, maybe in some quarters there are people who think that happy times are here again, but every Monday, if you've noticed, the market is manipulated upward, and they push gold and silver down, and they've done that again today, and it'll carry over a little bit into tomorrow, and then we'll have a rally again in gold and silver, and the market will sell off again. It's not going anywhere, the market. In reference to the questions you were asking earlier, the Chinese and the Russians are the leadership of what they call the BRIC nations, which includes Venezuela and India and Iran. And these are the nations that are politically at odds with the United States and to a great extent Western Europe. And they're calling for, and have been calling for the last 3 or 4 years, a currency, a reserve currency, rather than the dollar because of the problems that it's had. And they, in order to compromise, probably will accept a new currency in the form of a basket of currencies, perhaps from the top 7 nations or perhaps from the top 20 nations, which is the G20. And that is, I think, the way that they're going to go on it. The IMF and OPEC both, in what they've covered previously, have recommended that that be a way to go if one had to go that way. As far as the Amero is concerned, I don't see anything happening with that. I think that the use of that is not appropriate. I think if they're going to do anything, they're going to go for a world currency, devalue every currency, default on all debt, and go to a new international currency unit, and they would have it digital and partially backed by gold. And the world is not going to accept it. And the reason why is people are listening all over the world to programs like yours, and there's only a handful of them. And the word is getting out because we get emails to that effect every day, probably 20 or 30 of them. And so the rest of the world is catching on. I think that the people should know that Wen Xiaobo, who is the premier of communist China, started his career as a gold geologist. And so I think that perhaps maybe China might start using, or has been using, some of their dollars to buy gold. And I think that is something that's going to continue. And they, about 4 months ago, stopped buying treasury paper. And they did switch from agency paper, which is Fannie, Freddie, and that sort of stuff. They've been switching out of that and into short-term treasuries to make the U.S. happy. But the fact that they're going into short-term paper tells me that the whole situation to them is very dicey. They don't want to go out 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, or even 30. They're buying short-term paper, even though it pays very little. And so I think that's where all of that is going. And there are a lot of programs out there that are listened to quite extensively because they're on major networks with the Limbaughs, Hannitys, and O'Reillys, and Turner, and Beck. And they're all anti-gold. Even Mark Faber is. Even Jimmy Rogers has always been. And this is the coterie that stands in there. And in psychopolitical warfare, you call that the captive opposition. And so what does that mean? It means those people are controlled, and they give you 95% of the truth, and then the 5% that the elitists want you to hear.
I want to jump in there, Bob. Last week, a bombshell announcement was made, and that was, of course, that the Federal Reserve is going to buy $300 billion in Treasury bills. What does this mean?
It means that the figure is already $1 trillion. It's a long weekend for these guys. And I expect the Treasury, and this has been in the IF for 4 months, the Treasury has been selling secretly Treasury paper to the Fed. And I don't know how much they've bought. The Fed has facilities in the Cayman Islands, and they have been buying Treasury paper over there for a long time. Mm-hmm. They create the money out of thin air in Washington, and then that credit would be transferred to a Cayman account, which in turn would buy the treasuries.
Is this why we saw? I was just going to ask: is this why we saw two major airlines establish nonstop flights a couple months ago between Washington D.C. and the Cayman Islands?
That's correct. And about 85%, I guess, of the hedge funds are there. And the hedge funds are what are controlling the markets right now. And the hedge fund legislation and domicile is all controlled by the black nobility in Europe, which is the Queen of England. And evidently Cayman has been the chosen one. There are other places that they use, but that's the main one. And if you noticed in 2 issues back, I gave the names of the people who are actually running this contraband operation.
You know, I just want to add, for people, if you missed it, he said the Federal Reserve has offshore accounts. The Federal Reserve has offshore accounts. Now, this whole idea, though, of printing up as much money as we think we want to have to do whatever paybacks we want to do, and leave no banker behind, is, to me, I mean, why doesn't every other country say the same thing? Why doesn't China say, well, look, we're going to print up $1 trillion of wands here, and we're going to just flood our economy? And why doesn't the world flood the economy like the United States is doing?
They are.
It's free money.
They are. Oh. They've increased money and credit over the last 5 years by over 14%. Last month's year-on-year figure for England is 18.8%. And China's doing just that with the $568 billion that they're injecting into their economy. And every time China buys dollars, they have to create yuan, and the yuan is printed off the printing presses. And the reason they like to do that is it artificially keeps their currency lower than other competitors.
Well, we heard right after the first of the year that it was estimated that since the bailout and since the home mortgage collapse issue, that the Fed had increased the money supply by nearly 70%, and the printing presses have still been going 24/7. I can only estimate that they've increased the money supply by maybe 100% by now.